There can be no doubt, Bobby Hughes, that Roxy Music were making some of the best music around at that point in time, eh?
No question at all, 1973. Obviously, Eno just left the band, but there was still Eddie Jobson came in, more of which in a bit, actually, when we look at this issue of Sounds. But yeah, they were just impeccable, weren't they? Wonderful.
It was just relentless. I mean, so great.
Yeah, so anyway, we're looking at Sounds here, 27th of October 1973. On the front page says the band have a new album Rush released by Capitol next month, and EMI are hoping to bring them over to the UK for dates in the spring. The new album, entitled Moondog Matinee, marks the return of the band after a long layoff. It's 2 years since the last album. Cahoots, and like David Bowie, Brian Ferry and Don McLean, they recorded a retrospective album featuring old favourites that they used to play while they were in Ronnie Hawkins' backing group, the Hawks. So this has got me thinking a little bit. 1973 seemed to be the year, almost like a watershed year, when rock and roll became nostalgic for the first time, because you had Brian Ferry doing covers records, Bowie doing pin-ups, you had the band here, the Beach Boys were doing Carl and the Passions when they're sort of reviving all the music they loved as teenagers. John Lennon was recording rock and roll, which didn't come out for another couple of years, but that was the start of all that. And then culturally, you had That'll Be the Day with David Essex, film-wise, and American Graffiti as well over in the States, George Lucas.
It's all true, Bob. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that obviously there'd been enough time lapsed for them to allow themselves to become nostalgic, if you know what I mean. You need a certain period of time, don't you? And from the genesis of rock and roll, if you go on 15 years, that's when people can go, oh, I was listening to this when I was a kid. And, I mean, the funny thing is that it's supposed to be the case that Brian Ferry came up with the idea of doing the old tunes. Bowie got wind of it, thought, aye, I'll have a bit of that, and get him before them, which is exactly what he did with Slade for booking Earl's Court, wasn't it? Which backfired on Bowie. So Slade booked Earl's Court to do a massive show. They never had any gigs there. Is it 17,000 people or something? And then Bowie thought, aye, I'll get in there a couple of weeks beforehand. And of course, he was the guinea pig, and it was a disaster, darling.
It was a disaster. But you know, that's the nature of the beast, though, isn't it? You take a risk. You know, you try and get in first.
You take a risk telling David Bowie anything. That was the thing. Because it was Mick Jagger, wasn't it, who said, don't show David Bowie your new shoes. I said, we'll go out and buy them and wear them before you.
Absolutely, yeah, famously. Also in the news, Joni Mitchell is currently in A&M Studios recording her next album, which is due for release at the end of the year. For the first time, she's working in the studio with a band, LA Express, whose leader, Tommy Scott, played the horn parts on Blue and For the Roses albums. So this was a departure for her, wasn't it? Because people, I think, just expected her, I'm sure the record company as well, to be this sensitive singer-songwriter playing an acoustic guitar for the next 10 years. But she was off playing jazz with these big bands that she'd sort of picked up in LA. Yeah,
and the sentence then that you came out with, that Joni Mitchell is in the A&M studio, I thought you were going to say A&E. Just for a split second, I thought Joni Mitchell's in A&E. I thought, what? Hang on.
That would have been the top story, Mark. I would have read that out before the band.
Okay.
And Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Brain Salad Surgery is scheduled for early November release on Manticore. Features cover design from original paintings commissioned by ELP from the Swiss surrealist artist H.R. Geiger. Lest we forget, he'd also this is the guy famously, of course, who did the biomechanical alien creature for Ridley Scott's Alien, wasn't it?
He did, and the cover of the ELP album is great as well.
It is. It's brilliant. Prior to this, he'd done a sleeve for Magma, which I didn't realise.
Oh, right.
American notes, Hawkwind will make their first States tour next month, with their first venue to be Howard Stein's Academy of Music. The group will debut the presentation of Space Ritual at the Academy, and the following evening they booked them again for the Chicago Auditorium. United Artists, meanwhile, will rush out Hawkwind's Space Ritual and Alive in Liverpool and London album. They also plan a mammoth support campaign to break the group here in the States. I'm not sure how much kind of traction they gained in the States, Hawkwind. It probably went over people's heads a little bit. Yeah,
I'm not aware of it either. I never got any impression that they made a real dent over there anyway.
Yeah, I don't think so. Also, American news, look out for Lou Reed's Berlin to be presented on Broadway in the next few months. Yes, a theatrical presentation is being worked out, so I didn't know whether this was just kind of a bit of sort of news filler or guff. But apparently there was a plan. Lou Reed supposedly got together with Andy Warhol to plan a theatrical presentation of Berlin, but the critical response was so negative that it put them off, apparently.
Well, I wonder if it was a good thing, but I mean, obviously the critical response to Berlin did change pretty rapidly, didn't it? I mean, it became one of his most celebrated albums.
Yeah, completely. Just underneath that, already the rumours are flying that the new Sunset Strip rock club, the Roxy, is in financial trouble. John Lennon's been hanging out in the club, and David Geffen and his partners are trying to persuade the ex-Beatle to perform there. So it had only been open for about a month, and Neil Young, I think, had played the first gigs there. But it was perhaps more famous at this time for being the hangout for John Lennon and Harry Nilsson and Keith Moon and Ringo on Lennon's sort of Lost Weekend, which went on for, I don't know, best part of a year, I think.
Yeah, and he behaved terribly, if you don't mind me saying. But of course, that was the Hollywood Vampires, all of that crew who all hung out together.
That's right. On the singles front, review by John Peel. He's got Susie Quattro, Wings, Stray Dog, The Osmonds, Black Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. He says, in a sense, Black Sabbath's currency has been much debased by the glut of pop rock bands who, I'm afraid, contrive to sound rather more exciting. Actually, the vocals did at one point put me in mind of Miss Quattro, but nevertheless, dare I say it, Black Sabbath sound a bit dated. Ooh. But there's also Ronnie Lane's How Come. He says Ronnie and his chums have produced a record that prances along lightly while retaining an undercurrent of power that recalls the best of the Small Faces stroke Faces. The lyrics are intriguing. Hemlock in your spice rack. And I Drown My Old Cat. What do you say about that, for example? And they're beautifully sung in Ron's best Mile End Dylan voice. A record, Ron, to be proud of. And I look forward to hearing the band on Top Gear. So it's almost like a personal message there. Come and do a session for me.
Yeah, why not? And we're going to play it now as well, aren't we? Fabulous. Ronnie Lane and Slim Chance and How Come, Mark Riley and Slim Bob over in Yorkshire. So is this around about the time that he got a caravan and went off around the country doing a tour?
It was just the start of that, I think. Yeah, it was the big carnival tour, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which cost him a fortune, so he didn't do it again because it just lost money hand over fist.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought that it taking you like 5 days to get from Manchester to Liverpool would put economic pressures on you? Eh?
Oh, I know. You could never see that coming, could it? Especially by horse and cart.
Absolutely.
Anyway. So we're looking at sounds here, 27th of October 1973. Reg Presley pops into the CBS office to meet Sounds. It's the first time he's been there, apparently, since the Trogs called in to see if the label wanted to sign them just after they'd recorded Wild Thing. He says, but they turned us and the record down. Now CBS have signed Reg to a solo deal. The Trogs have got a deal with Pie, so there's loads going on. And it says he's currently pondering what to wear for the show the Trogs are due to do with David Bowie on Friday for the NBC Midnight Special that's being taped at the Marquee. He says, I was in Sweden when I heard about that, rang home, heard that Bowie'd been trying to get hold of me. I was very surprised when I found out he'd asked for us to be on the show with him. I must give him a bit of a kiss when I see him. I've not met the bloke, but it seems that when he was in the States, he picked up on the kids who were going of our records. That happened to us in America. We got to be a bit of a cult thing. Sometimes they wanted records I didn't even know we'd recorded. Okay. This is, of course, the 1980 floor show. The Trogs were invited.
Yeah, definitely, alongside Marianne Faithfull and various other people. Yeah.
Going to get to that. So page 11, Rob Mackey reports on Bowie's return to London. He says, sets it up here. He says it's 10:45 a.m. on a drizzly Saturday morning, and they're already lining up expectantly with David Bowie fan club cards and tickets clutched tightly to them like ration cards in the war, lined up neatly along Wardour Street. It says Midnight Special on the tickets, and they're doing their best to pretend it's another nighttime spectacular with their best going out clothes and a few painted faces on a bleary morning. So this was NBC had this idea, didn't they? I think ABC, Don Kirshner, had done a big spectacular with Rolling Stones, so NBC thought we should get in on the act here, and their choice was Bowie, who was just rising very fast at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I was a member of the fan club at the time and did get an invite, but, you know, I was 12, so it wasn't highly likely, was it, really? But I do know somebody who went to it, which was Vic Goddard. Now, Vic didn't have a ticket, but he just hung around at the back door trying to get in, couldn't get in, and then he saw the wagon there with all the monitors inside and the people mixing it and doing the vision mixing, and they invited him in, and so he watched it on the screen.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
all right, okay, yeah. I knew he'd met him outside a studio at one point. So there's all sorts of bands on it. So it goes on all day. As I say, it's 10:45. It goes on till 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock here. We've got Carmen on to begin with, then Bowie comes on. He says it takes a while before David actually makes a stage. First his band assembles. Ainsley Dunbar looking all wrong in the group's black satin uniform. Trevor Boulder, Mike Garson, second guitarist Mark Pritchard are all dressed the same. Mick Ronson, like the brass section, is all in white. There's a conga player with an earring called Jeffrey. This is Jeff McCormack, of course.
Yeah, I love Jeff.
And there's a duo of backup singers and dancers, Ava Cherry and Jason Guess. doesn't get done until, like I say, much later on. Nobody's all bedraggled. But he says Bowie soldiers on with his costumes becoming ever more bizarre and the whole thing building to a ridiculous climax with a strong ballad called 1984 from his forthcoming musical. And around 9:45, the climax, a duet on I Got You Babe with Marianne Faithfull wearing a nun's outfit, which is famous, isn't it?
It is. And I tell you what, I mean, I saw the costumes when I went to the V&A, lucky enough to do that. But the most famous one being the spider's web, which has got like dummies, mannequins' hands placed on it.
Yeah.
But the version that most people who know anything about Bowie will have seen has got two hands on it. But there was a third hand, which was, how can we put this, somewhere near the nether regions, which NBC took exception to, so they had to take it off.
Really?
So
is that right?
Somewhere there is an extra hand knocking about, which is even more famous or infamous than the other two hands that appeared on the costume.
Right, okay, I like it indeed. So, new albums, again, Pin-Ups is out. Martin Heyman thinks it's great. The Who's Quadrophenia, reviewed by a gushing Rob Mackey, who said, if this isn't going to be the album that will come to represent 1973 in years to come, then somebody's going to have to pull some genius fingers out very speedily and lay down a highly ambitious masterwork in total perfection. Even by Who standards, I think it's evident that everybody is reaching a new combined height here. And underneath that, there's Faust 4 by Steve Peacock, which is a weird one, review-wise. Says you can see why a lot of chaps regard Faust as something of a bad continental joke. You can also see how it could be rather difficult to translate into type any convincing reasons why their music works on any level. Personally, I find what they play a rather pleasing noise, but it's rather a problem to say why.
Okay, intriguing.
The music on Faust 4 continues. Sounds as if they gathered one night in the studio with their instruments and a clutch of basic ideas, played with the tapes running, and edited down the results into an album. Well, it's basically how they worked, wasn't it? That's how they did it.
Yeah, Can used to do the same thing, didn't they?
Yeah,
quite
of course
often
they did.
Jam away and then cut things up.
And also out, Kevin Coyne's Marjorie Razorblade, which is something of a classic.
It is. Okay, let's have Marlene. Say thank you very much to Quasi tonight, and also to Johnny Esp and Louis, and also to Marc Plant, who's been producing tonight and last night. Great job. And of course a big thanks to Bobby Hughes and the Parallel Universe.
Yeah, well, looking at sounds here, 27th of October 1973. Gigs this week. You got Humble Pie at Glasgow Apollo, Four Tops at Chatham Central Hall, John Martin at Manchester University, King Crimson at Liverpool Empire. So they'd be touring Lark's Tongues in Aspic, I think, wouldn't they? 73.
Wow. Yeah.
Genesis at Sheffield City Hall, Thin Lizzy at Bedworth Civic Centre, Michael Chapman at Lady Mitchell Hall in Cambridge, Faust at Exeter University, Roxy Music at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester, Kevin Coyne, just heard him at Hemel Hempstead Arts Centre, Cockney Rebel at Leicester University, Jimmy Ruffin at Norbreck Castle in Blackpool, Bebop Deluxe at King's Cross Youth Club in Halifax, Screaming Lord Sutch at Kent-Even College in Grantham, Kilburn and the High Roads at the Torrington in North London, Ivor Cutler at Boxmoor Hall in Hemel Hempstead, and Mott the Hoople supported by Queen at Leeds Town Hall. That was the start of that tour. That was the first date. So you saw that tour, didn't you?
Yeah, the 26th of November, 1973 at the Opera House. Yeah, incredible.
Incredible. On the live front, you've got, let's see, who is this? It's Phil Holt goes to see Roxy Music. Says after a few months' absence and the departure of the popular Brian Eno from the group, it would have been understandable if Roxy Music had been slightly apprehensive about their reception at Birmingham Town Hall on the second date of their tour. First few numbers were tentative. They seemed to be getting used to playing live again, but once this was achieved, the show burst into life. Brian Ferry is now very much the frontman of the group. The acquisition of Eddie Jobson has allowed him to leave the keyboard more often and concentrate on the vocals. From the audience's obvious adulation, he's well on the way to becoming a cult figure. Immaculately dressed in a white tuxedo, he cuts a James Dean-style figure, crouching and curling around the microphone, sounding remarkably at times like a parody of a 50s rock singer. Goes on to say the best compliment to Eddie Jobson is probably that he fitted in perfectly. A dashing figure in red velvet tails and sporting a see-through violin. He also managed to turn in a good solid keyboard sound. That was it was a key addition, wasn't it? No doubt about it.
Well, yeah, that tour was one of the ones, that I was just on the cusp of starting to go into gigs, as we just mentioned, and so the ones that I did miss were Bowie and Roxy and Lou Reed at the Palace doing Berlin. So I just about missed out on them, but then, managed to get in for Mott the Hoople and Queen.
Yeah, wonderful. mouthful. Okay. Michael Chapman made a classic comeback performance at the Roundhouse on Sunday, overcoming extensive sound problems and 3 broken strings during his first number to turn in a fine set. 3 strings, he decided, was too many to replace. So after a little bit of vintage In the Valley, he turned to electric guitar for the remainder of the evening and whipped up some fairly spacey musical interludes. Goes on to say that Pop's an undervalued guitar hero, electric guitar hero. We know what a genius he was on guitar anyway.
Yeah, we were so lucky to have him on this programme, just sitting there barely 6 feet away and playing that guitar in the way that he did. And yeah, just a remarkable man. Such a sad loss.
It was really. And he was revered, wasn't he? All this new generation of guitar players, especially American guitar players, absolutely adored him.
Yeah, and the great thing about Michael, one of the great things about him was that he was very kind of... he didn't know who to trust, you know. He was a tough nut to crack, but we did it on this programme. You know, he ended up loving coming in here because he knew that, well, we genuinely loved what he did and we knew about him rather than just bringing him on to fill a bit of airtime, you know.
Yeah, exactly it. And just very, very, very briefly, we've got Genesis at Colston Hall, Bristol, and they were great, apparently.
Right, okay. Would that have been for... no, it was Leicester, de Montfort and Manchester. Genesis Live, wasn't it, I'm thinking. Okay, Bob, we've got to go. You're great. Okay. And we'll see you on Thursday.
Will do, mate.
All
Lovely.
Right. Cheers, fella. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Okay, then. So, yeah, we've got to go. Tom Robinson is next. This is Faust and the Sad Skinhead.
Prepare to exit the parallel universe.
Marc Riley, BBC 6 Music.
And shut the door on your way out.